For 3 years I was unconscious after a stroke, but my consciousness returned. I decided not to tell my relatives. What I heard at my bedside changed my entire life. My daughter was telling her husband, "I wish she'd die already. My name is Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 68 years old, and I need to tell you something that happened to me 3 years ago. Something that changed everything I thought I knew about my family, about love, and about the people who are supposed to care for you when you can't care for yourself." It was a Tuesday morning in March when my world went black. I remember it so clearly because I was making pancakes for my granddaughter Emma, who was staying with us for spring break. She was only 12 then, with those bright blue eyes that reminded me so much of my daughter Sarah when she was little. The smell of maple syrup was filling the kitchen, and Emma was chattering away about some boy at school who had given her a valentine. Her voice was like music to me, that excited chatter that only children can produce when they're talking about something that matters deeply to them. I was standing at the stove in my favorite bathrobe, the pink one with tiny roses that Sarah had given me for Mother's Day 2 years before. The kitchen was warm and bright, sunlight streaming through the yellow curtains I had made myself when Sarah was in high school. Everything felt perfect and normal and safe. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, swinging her legs while she waited for breakfast, her blonde hair still messy from sleep. I was flipping the last pancake when it happened. One moment I was listening to Emma's sweet voice, watching the golden batter bubble and brown in the pan. And the next moment, there was this crushing pain in my head, like someone had taken a sledgehammer to my skull. The pain was so sudden, so intense, that I couldn't even cry out. The spatula fell from my hand and clattered onto the linoleum floor, and I could hear Emma screaming my name. But her voice seemed to be coming from very far away, like she was calling to me from the bottom of a well. I remember falling. The kitchen floor rushed up to meet me, and I had this strange, detached thought about how I needed to turn off the stove so the pancake wouldn't burn. Then everything went dark, and I was floating in a space that had no color, no sound, no feeling at all. The next thing I knew, I was floating. Not really floating, but that's the only way I can describe it. I could hear voices sometimes, distant and muffled, like people talking underwater. There were machines beeping constantly, a rhythmic sound that became the soundtrack to my existence. I could hear footsteps on linoleum floors, the squeak of wheels on gurneys, the rustle of clothing as people moved around me. The doctors called it a massive stroke. I learned this much later, piecing together fragments of conversations I overheard. They told my family I was in a coma, that the chances of me waking up were slim to none. The blood clot had hit the main artery feeding the left side of my brain, cutting off oxygen to the areas that controlled movement, speech, and conscious thought. They used words like devastating and catastrophic and irreversible damage. But here's the thing nobody knew, not even the doctors. I wasn't completely gone. About 6 months after the stroke, my consciousness started coming back, bit by bit, like someone slowly turning up the volume on a radio that had been playing static. At first, it was just awareness of sounds. The constant hum of machines, nurses talking in hushed voices about medication schedules and patient care, the squeak of wheelchair wheels in the hallway outside my room. Then came awareness of touch. I could feel when someone moved my arms or legs during physical therapy. I could feel the rough texture of hospital sheets against my skin, the gentle pressure of blood pressure cuffs inflating around my arm, the sting of needles when they drew blood or adjusted my IV. But I couldn't respond to any of it. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even open my eyes to let anyone know I was there. I tried so hard to move, to speak, to give any sign that I was there inside my body. I would focus all my energy on trying to wiggle just one finger or to open my eyes, even a crack, or to make some small sound that would alert the nurses to my presence. But nothing worked. It was like being trapped in a prison made of my own flesh, like being buried alive in a coffin that breathed and had a heartbeat, but couldn't do anything else. The doctors had a name for it, though they never suspected that's what I had. They called it locked-in syndrome, a condition where the patient is conscious and aware, but unable to move or speak due to paralysis of nearly all voluntary muscles. But my case was different from the textbook examples. Most locked-in syndrome patients retain some movement, usually in their eyes or eyelids. I had nothing. No voluntary movement at all. My daughter Sarah came to visit me every day at first. She would sit in that uncomfortable blue plastic chair next to my bed and hold my hand while she talked about her job at the insurance company, about her husband Tom and their plans to renovate their kitchen, about the book club she had joined and the novel they were reading about a woman who inherited a house in Ireland. Her voice was always cheerful when she spoke to me, full of hope and love and determination. She would brush my hair with the same gentle strokes she had used when she was little, and I would brush hers before school. She would put on my favorite lipstick, the coral pink one I'd worn for 30 years, saying it made me look more like myself. "You're going to wake up, Mom," she would whisper, her breath warm against my ear. "I know you are. You're the strongest woman I know. Remember when Dad left us when I was 16? You worked 2 jobs and still managed to get me through high school. You never gave up then, and I'm not giving up on you now. We're going to get through this together, just like we always have." Those words meant everything to me. They gave me strength during the long, dark hours when I felt like I might disappear completely into the void of my own mind. I held onto her voice like a lifeline, believing that somehow, some way, I would find a way back to her. Her love was like a rope thrown down into the well where I was trapped, and I clung to it with everything I had. Tom, my son-in-law, was quieter during visits. He's always been a practical man, an accountant who likes everything to add up neatly, who prefers facts to feelings and logic to hope. He would stand at the foot of my bed, hands shoved deep in his pockets, while Sarah fussed over me like I was a child who needed tending. Sometimes he would clear his throat and say something like, "Hey there, Maggie. Hope you're comfortable." But I could hear the discomfort in his voice, the way it cracked slightly when he tried to sound normal. He was a good man, but this situation was beyond his ability to fix or understand, and that made him nervous. My granddaughter Emma was the hardest visitor to bear. She was only 12 when I had the stroke, and by the time my consciousness returned, she was 13, and her voice had changed. She sounded older, more uncertain, like she was trying to figure out how to talk to someone who couldn't talk back. She would sit on the edge of my bed and tell me about school, about her friends Jessica and Mia, about the books she was reading for English class. But I could hear her crying sometimes, soft little sniffles that she tried to hide by turning her face away from me. "I miss you so much, Grandma Maggie," she whispered one day, her small hand resting on my arm. "I know you can't hear me, but I need you to know that I still remember everything you taught me. How to make your famous chocolate chip cookies with the secret ingredient that you said was love, but was really vanilla extract. How to braid my hair the way you used to do it every morning before school. How to stand up for myself when kids at school are mean, like when Tyler Morrison called me ugly, and you told me that ugly comes from the inside, and I was beautiful all the way through. The nursing home where they moved me after a year was called Sunset Manor. What a name. It made me think of endings, of things winding down, of light fading away into darkness. My room was on the second floor, and through the window I could see a parking lot, and beyond that, a McDonald's, with a broken sign that flickered on and off all night long like a neon heartbeat. The view wasn't much, but it became my connection to the outside world, my proof that life was continuing beyond the walls of my room. The staff at Sunset Manor was kind enough, I suppose. They had that professional compassion that comes from years of caring for people who couldn't care for themselves. There was Nancy, a nurse's aide who had been working there for 15 years. She had gentle hands when she turned me to prevent bed sores, and she always talked to me while she worked, telling me about her own mother who had passed away from cancer the year before I arrived. "I know you probably can't hear me, honey," Nancy would say as she adjusted my pillows and smoothed my sheets. "But I like to think my mama can hear me when I talk to her picture on my dresser at home. So maybe you can hear me too. I'm going to take real good care of you, just like I would want someone to take care of my mama if she was in your situation." Nancy smelled like vanilla perfume and coffee, and her voice had a slight southern accent that reminded me of my own grandmother who had grown up in Georgia. She would hum sometimes while she worked, old hymns mostly, and the sound was oddly comforting in the sterile environment of the nursing home. She treated me with dignity, always explaining what she was going to do before she did it, always making sure I was covered and comfortable. The physical therapist, a young man named Jake, came twice a week to move my arms and legs. He had calloused hands that spoke of a life outside this place, maybe rock climbing or weightlifting, and he smelled like the gym and mint gum. He would chat away while he worked, telling me about his girlfriend Ashley and their plans to move to Colorado after he finished his degree in sports medicine. "You've got good muscle tone for someone who's been bedridden this long," he would say as he bent my knee back and forth, stretching the tendons and trying to keep my joints from freezing up completely. "That's a good sign. Your body's still fighting, even if your mind is, well, you know. Some people give up completely, but you're hanging in there." If only he knew how right he was. My body was fighting, but so was my mind. Every day was a battle to stay present, to stay aware, to not let myself drift away into the comfortable darkness that sometimes seemed so appealing. There were moments when I thought it would be easier to just let go, to stop fighting and sink into whatever peace might be waiting for me. But something inside me refused to surrender. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was love. But I couldn't let go. But I did know. That was the terrible irony of my situation. My mind wasn't gone at all. I was perfectly aware, perfectly present, perfectly trapped. I knew what day it was because the nurses would announce it when they came in for shift changes. I knew what season it was by the quality of light coming through my window and the conversations I overheard about weather. I knew what year it was because I could follow the news programs that played on the television in my room. I could follow conversations, understand jokes, feel embarrassed when the nurses had to change my adult diaper. I experienced every humiliation, every small kindness, every moment of my reduced existence with complete clarity. When they talked about me like I wasn't there, discussing my bodily functions and medical needs, I felt the shame of it as keenly as if I had been fully aware and mobile. The loneliness was the worst part. Imagine being surrounded by people all day long but being completely unable to connect with any of them. I couldn't even cry, though God knows I wanted to. The tears would build up inside me like a dam about to burst. But they had nowhere to go. My body had become a prison, and I was serving a life sentence with no possibility of parole. Time moved differently when you're locked inside your own body. Days blended into weeks, weeks into months. I learned to measure time by the shift changes, by the meals that arrived 3 times a day, even though I couldn't eat them, by the television programs that the staff would turn on for background noise. Judge Judy at 2 in the afternoon, her sharp voice cutting through the haze of my existence. The evening news at 6, with its litany of disasters and politics that seemed to belong to another world. Late-night infomercials that played while the overnight nurse sat at her desk, doing crossword puzzles and drinking coffee from a thermos. My room became my entire universe. Every crack in the ceiling, every stain on the wall, every sound from the hallway became as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. There was Mrs. Henderson in the room next to mine, who called out for her dead husband every night around 10 o'clock. Her voice thin and desperate as she asked him to come back to her. Down the hall was Mr. Rodriguez, who had his television volume turned up so loud that I could follow every episode of his soap operas, learning the complicated love lives of characters I would never see. The seasonal changes became important to me in ways they had never been before. I could tell when spring arrived, not just by the longer days, but by the quality of light through my window, the sound of rain that was softer than a winter precipitation. Summer brought the noise of children playing in the courtyard below, their voices carrying up through my open window like echoes of Emma at that age. Fall meant the smell of leaves and the sound of rain against glass. Winter was the hardest, with its early darkness and the way the heating system in the building groaned and settled like an old person's bones. Sarah's visits became less frequent as the months went by. I understood why, even though it broke my heart piece by piece. It's hard to keep talking to someone who never responds, who never shows any sign that they hear you or care about what you're saying. What had once been daily visits became weekly, then every other week, then just weekends, and sometimes not even that. But I treasured those visits more than Sarah could ever know. She would still brush my hair, though not as carefully as before, and I could tell when she was distracted or tired by the way her movements became more mechanical. She would still update me on family news, though her voice had lost some of its hopeful tone and taken on the flat quality of someone going through the motions. Tom rarely came anymore, and when he did, he would stand by the door as if he was ready to flee at any moment. I didn't blame him. This wasn't the life he had signed up for when he married Sarah. He had expected a mother-in-law who would babysit their children and join them for holidays, not this endless obligation that drained their finances and emotional energy. The doctors say there's been no change. Sarah told me one Saturday afternoon in late summer. She was sitting in the chair by my bed, but she wasn't looking at me. Instead, she was staring out the window at the parking lot where heat waves shimmered off the asphalt. They don't think you're ever going to wake up, Mom." I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shake her and tell her that I was right there, that I could hear every word she was saying, that I was fighting with everything I had to find a way back to her. But all I could do was lie there, as motionless as a stone, while my daughter slowly gave up hope. The conversations I overheard between Sarah and Tom when they thought I couldn't hear became more strained as time went on. They would step out into the hallway, but the walls were thin, and their voices carried through the doorway, like whispers in a cathedral. These fragments of conversation became the pieces of a puzzle I was forced to assemble, each one adding to my understanding of how much my condition was costing them. "The insurance won't cover much more," Tom would say, his voice tight with stress. "We're looking at $2,400 a month out of pocket, and that's if nothing else goes wrong. If she develops complications, if she needs more intensive care, it could double." "She's my mother, Tom. What am I supposed to do, just abandon her?" "I'm not saying abandon her. I'm saying we need to be realistic about our options. Emma's going to be starting high school next year. We have her college fund to think about, our own retirement, the mortgage. We can't sustain this indefinitely. Don't talk to me about money when my mother is lying in there like that. Sarah, honey, she's not getting better. The doctors have been clear about that from the beginning. We need to think about what she would want. Do you really think she would want to drain our savings, to put Emma's future at risk, just to keep her body alive? But even as Sarah defended me to her husband, I could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. The visits became shorter. Sometimes she would just sit quietly, not saying anything at all. And I could feel the weight of her sadness pressing down on the room like a physical presence. Once, I heard her crying softly, and it took every ounce of strength I had not to somehow break through my paralysis and comfort her. Emma still came sometimes, usually on Sundays after church. She was 14 now, and her visits had changed too. Instead of chattering about school and friends, she would sit quietly and do her homework at the small table by my window. Sometimes she would read to me from whatever book she was reading for English class, her voice more mature now, but still carrying echoes of the little girl who used to climb into my lap for bedtime stories. I got accepted to the honor society at school, she told me one day, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and sadness. I know you would be proud of me, Grandma. You always said education was the most important thing, that nobody could ever take that away from you. I wrote my application essay about you, actually, about how you raised Mom all by yourself and worked 2 jobs to put her through college. She was right. I was proud of her, desperately, achingly proud. But she would never know it. She would graduate from high school, go to college, get married, have children of her own. And I would never be able to tell her how proud I was, how much I loved her, how much I believed in her. The nursing home had support groups for families of long-term care patients. I knew this because I heard Sarah talking about it with one of the social workers. The social worker, a woman named Linda with a gentle voice and a Tennessee accent, encouraged Sarah to attend these meetings. It might help to talk to other people who are going through the same thing, Linda said during one of her visits to check on how the family was coping. Caring for a loved one with a traumatic brain injury is one of the hardest things a family can face. You don't have to go through it alone. There are resources, support systems, people who understand what you're dealing with. Sarah started attending the support group meetings on Thursday evenings. She would sometimes mention them during her visits, telling me about other families she had met, other stories of hope and heartbreak that made my own situation seem part of a larger tapestry of human suffering. There was a woman whose husband had been in a coma for 5 years after a car accident. A man whose teenage son had suffered a brain injury in a football accident. People learning to navigate the maze of insurance claims, medical decisions, and emotional exhaustion. There's this one woman, her name is Patricia, Sarah told me one day, her voice thoughtful. Her mother has been in a vegetative state for 7 years. 7 years, Mom. Can you imagine? She says some days she wishes her mother would just find peace, that it would be a blessing for everyone, including her mother. Find peace. I knew what that meant. It was a polite way of saying die. The idea that my own daughter might be thinking the same thing filled me with a cold dread that went deeper than anything I had ever felt. But I tried to push those thoughts away. Sarah loved me. She would never give up on me. She would never wish for me to die. Would she? Winter came and went, then spring, then another summer. The staff at Sunset Manor changed with the seasons. Nancy left to take care of her own aging father in Alabama. Jake graduated and moved to Colorado with Ashley, sending me a postcard that one of the nurses read aloud. New faces appeared, new voices that I had to learn to recognize and categorize. Each change felt like another small death, another connection to the world being severed. My body was changing too. Despite the physical therapy, my muscles were atrophying, shrinking away until my arms and legs looked like sticks wrapped in pale skin. My skin was getting thinner, more fragile, developing pressure sores that required daily attention. The bright coral lipstick that Sarah used to put on me was replaced with plain chapstick to keep my lips from cracking. I was becoming less and less like the woman I used to be, and more like a medical case study. A collection of symptoms to be managed rather than a person to be cared for. The staff was professional and kind, but I could see how they looked at me. Not as Margaret, former teacher and mother and grandmother, but as the patient in room 214 who needed to be turned every 2 hours and fed through a tube. But my mind remained sharp, terrifyingly, achingly sharp. I could still think clearly, still remember every detail of my life before the stroke. I remembered Sarah taking her first steps in our little apartment on Maple Street. The way she had let go of the coffee table and toddled toward me with such concentration on her face. I remembered teaching her to ride a bike in the park behind our house, running alongside her until she was steady enough to go on her own. I remembered her graduation from college. How proud she had looked in her cap and gown, how I had cried when they called her name. I remembered her wedding day, walking her down the aisle because her father wasn't there to do it, feeling like my heart might burst with love and pride. Those memories were all I had left. That and the hope that somehow, someday, I would find a way to connect with the world again. But as the months turned into years, that hope began to feel more like a cruel joke than a comfort. It was on a Tuesday evening in October, almost exactly 3 years after my stroke, that everything changed. The air had that crisp autumn smell that came through the window when the staff opened it to air out the room, the scent of dying leaves and wood smoke from someone's fireplace in the distance. I could hear the distant sound of a football game playing on someone's television down the hall, the excited voice of a commentator calling a touchdown, crowd noise swelling and fading like ocean waves. Sarah and Tom had come for one of their increasingly rare visits. I could tell immediately that something was different. Their voices were hushed when they entered the room, and there was a tension between them that I hadn't heard before, like the air before a thunderstorm. Sarah's footsteps were heavier than usual, and Tom cleared his throat multiple times, something he always did when he was nervous about having a difficult conversation. "Hey, Mom," Sarah said, but her voice sounded strained, like she was forcing herself to sound normal. She sat down in the chair next to my bed, but she didn't take my hand like she usually did. Instead, she clutched her purse in her lap, her knuckles white with tension. "How are you feeling today?" It was a question she had asked me hundreds of times over the past 3 years, always with the same hopeful tone, as if maybe this time I would answer. But today was different. Today I could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the way the words came out flat and automatic, like a prayer repeated so many times it had lost all meaning. Tom remained standing by the door. I could sense his restlessness, the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the way he kept checking his watch. There was something they needed to discuss, something they had probably been talking about in the car on the way over, voices low and urgent as they tried to reach a decision that neither of them wanted to make. "The social worker wants to schedule another meeting with us," Sarah said finally, her voice carefully controlled. "About your care plan. About options." Options. There was that word again. In the language of long-term care, options usually meant difficult decisions about the level of care to continue, about quality of life, about when to let go. It was a euphemism, a way of talking about death without saying the word. Tom finally spoke up. "Sarah, maybe we should step outside to talk about this." "No," Sarah said firmly. "She can't hear us anyway. The doctors have been clear about that. Her brain activity shows no signs of consciousness. We're just talking to ourselves when we come here." If only she knew how wrong she was. If only there was some way to make her understand that every word was a knife in my heart. "Look," Tom continued, his voice gentle but determined. "I know this is hard, but we have to be practical here. It's been 3 years, Sarah. 3 years with no improvement, no response, nothing. The doctors say there's virtually no chance of recovery at this point. We're not helping her by prolonging this. I know what the doctors say. Do you? Because sometimes I think you're still holding on to some fantasy that she's going to wake up one day and everything will go back to normal. That's not going to happen. This is it. This is what the rest of her life looks like, however long that might be." There was a long silence. I could hear Sarah's breathing, slightly labored, the way it got when she was trying not to cry. I could hear the distant sound of a siren somewhere outside, growing louder and then fading away. Someone else's emergency, someone else's tragedy beginning or ending. She's my mother, Tom. She raised me by herself after Dad left. She worked 2 jobs to put me through college. She never gave up on anything in her life. She's the strongest person I know. She was strong, but that was before. This isn't living, Sarah. This is just existing. Look at her. Really look at her." I felt Tom move closer to my bed. I could smell his cologne, the same one he had worn since I first met him 15 years ago when Sarah brought him home for Thanksgiving dinner. He had been nervous then too, wanting to make a good impression. And I had liked him immediately for caring so much about my daughter's opinion. "She's lost probably 30 pounds, Tom said, his voice clinical now, like he was reading from a medical chart. "Her muscle mass is gone. She has those sores that won't heal properly despite all the care. The physical therapist says her joints are getting rigid despite the exercises. This isn't the woman who raised you, Sarah. That woman is already gone. Don't say that. I'm saying it because somebody has to. We can't keep pretending that this is sustainable. The emotional cost, the financial cost, the cost to Emma's future, we can't keep ignoring reality. Emma is starting to ask questions about why we spend so much time here, visiting someone who doesn't even know we're here. She needs her mother present in her life, not constantly worried about a situation that isn't going to change. Emma, my sweet granddaughter. I had been so focused on my own suffering that I hadn't fully considered how this was affecting her. She was 15 now, in the middle of her teenage years when she needed guidance and support. And instead of having a grandmother who could advise her about boys and school and life, she had this. A silent, motionless figure in a hospital bed who couldn't even acknowledge her presence. "What are you suggesting?" Sarah asked, and her voice was barely above a whisper. Tom was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle but firm, like a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. "I'm suggesting we talk to the doctors about comfort care, about making her comfortable and letting nature take its course. No more aggressive interventions, no more feeding tube if she develops complications. Just let her go peacefully." The words hit me like a physical blow. Comfort care. Letting nature take its course. They were talking about letting me die, about removing the feeding tube that had kept me alive for the past 2 years, about watching me slowly starve to death while telling themselves they were being merciful. "I can't," Sarah said, and now she was crying. can't make that decision. What if she can hear us? What if she's in there somewhere, fighting to come back? What if we're giving up just when she's about to wake up? Honey, if she was going to come back, it would have happened by now. 3 years is a long time. The brain damage from the stroke was too severe. We're not helping her by keeping her alive artificially. We're just prolonging the inevitable and causing ourselves unnecessary pain. They talked for another hour, going in circles, with Sarah alternating between anger and grief, while Tom remained patient but persistent. He had clearly thought this through, had probably been thinking about it for months, and he had all the logical arguments on his side. Sarah had only love and hope, and both were wearing thin after 3 years of waiting for a miracle that wasn't coming. Finally, they decided to leave and continue the discussion at home. Sarah kissed my forehead before they left, and I could taste the salt of her tears. "I love you, Mom," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." After they left, I lay in the darkness, processing what I had heard. My own daughter and son-in-law were discussing whether to let me die. They thought I was nothing more than a burden, a source of financial strain and emotional exhaustion. They wanted to give up on me. But the worst part was that I could understand their perspective. From their point of view, I was gone. The woman they loved, the mother and grandmother who had been part of their lives, had disappeared 3 years ago. All that remained was this shell, this breathing corpse that required constant care and gave nothing back. If I had been in their position, what would I have done? If it had been my mother lying in this bed for 3 years, with no sign of consciousness, no hope of recovery, how long would I have held on? The question tormented me through the long night. But then, in the darkest hour before dawn, something unexpected happened. I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and hesitant. The night shift was usually quiet, with most of the residents asleep and only one nurse on duty. But these footsteps were different, purposeful. My door opened, and I heard Sarah's voice, so quiet it was barely a whisper. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "I kept thinking about what you would want, what you would tell me to do." She came closer to my bed, and I could smell her perfume, the same vanilla scent she had worn since college. "Tom's right, isn't he? You always said you never wanted to be a burden. You made me promise that if something like this ever happened, I wouldn't keep you alive just for the sake of keeping you alive." She sat down in the chair, and I heard her take a shaky breath. "I've been selfish, haven't I? Keeping you here because I can't bear to let you go. But this isn't living. This is just existing. And that's not what you would want." She was quiet for a long time, and I thought maybe she had fallen asleep in the chair. But then she spoke again, her voice thick with tears. "I'm going to talk to the doctors tomorrow. About comfort care. About letting you go. I think it's what you would want. I think it's time." As she spoke those words, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Deep in my left hand, so faint I almost thought I had imagined it, my pinky finger twitched. But Sarah didn't notice. She was already gone, slipping out into the hallway as quietly as she had come, leaving me alone with the knowledge that I was about to die, and the impossible hope that maybe, just maybe, I was starting to come back. But it was too late. The decision had been made. The twitch in my pinky finger was so slight, so impossibly faint, that for a moment I wondered if I had imagined it. But then it happened again. A tiny movement, barely perceptible, but real. After 3 years of complete paralysis, something in my body was finally responding to my will. I focused every ounce of my consciousness on that finger, willing it to move again. Nothing happened for what felt like hours. But then, there it was. Another small twitch, like a butterfly wing brushing against my palm. It wasn't much, but it was everything. It was proof that I wasn't completely gone, that somewhere in the damaged pathways of my brain, connections were trying to reform. But Sarah was already gone, and I was alone with this tiny miracle that no one would witness. The next morning brought Dr. Patel, the neurologist who had been overseeing my case since the beginning. I had learned to recognize his voice over the years, calm, professional, with just a hint of an accent that spoke of medical school in another country, and long hours spent learning to deliver difficult news to American families. He usually came by once a month to check my chart and discuss my condition with whoever was available from my family. This time, Sarah and Tom were both there, along with Linda, the social worker. I could hear the tension in their voices, the careful way they spoke around the subject they had all come to discuss. "Mrs. Patterson," Dr. Patel said, though he was clearly addressing Sarah, "I understand you've been thinking about transitioning your mother to comfort care." "Yes," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. We think it might be time. I want you to know that this is never an easy decision, and there's no right or wrong answer. You've been incredibly devoted to your mother for 3 years. No one could question your commitment to her care." Tom cleared his throat. "Doctor, can you explain again what comfort care would mean exactly?" "Certainly. Comfort care means we would focus on keeping your mother comfortable and pain-free, but we would not take any extraordinary measures to prolong her life. We would continue with basic nursing care, keeping her clean, managing any discomfort, providing human contact and dignity. But if she were to develop pneumonia, for example, we might not treat it aggressively with antibiotics. If she had another stroke, we wouldn't intervene." "And the feeding tube?" Sarah asked. "That would be your decision. Some families choose to continue nutrition and hydration. Others feel that allowing natural death includes discontinuing artificial feeding. There are valid arguments for both approaches." I tried desperately to move my finger again, to give some sign that I was present for this conversation about my own death. But nothing happened. The slight movement from the night before seemed like a dream, a cruel trick my mind had played on itself. "How long would it take?" Tom asked. If we stop the feeding?" "It's difficult to say. In cases like your mother-in-law's, where the patient has been stable for an extended period, it could be anywhere from a few days to several weeks. We would make sure she was comfortable throughout the process." Several weeks. Several weeks of slowly starving to death while my family watched, telling themselves they were being merciful. The thought filled me with a terror so profound that I felt like I was drowning in it. "We need some time to think about it," Sarah said finally. "Of course, there's no rush. Take all the time you need. And please know that whatever you decide, we'll support you completely." After they left, I lay in the silence trying to process what I had heard. My family was planning to let me die, and there was nothing I could do to stop them. The tiny movement in my finger meant nothing if I couldn't find a way to make someone notice it. But then Nancy's replacement, a young nurse named Maria, came in to check my vitals. She was new, only a few weeks on the job, and she still talked to the patients like they might be able to hear her. "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson," she said cheerfully as she wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm. "Beautiful day outside. I opened your window a little to let some fresh air in." I could smell autumn in that fresh air, the scent of dying leaves and wood smoke, the crisp promise of winter coming. It occurred to me that if my family went through with their plan, I might not live to see another spring. Maria was checking my reflexes now, the routine neurological exam that all the nurses performed, but none of them expected to show any change. She lifted my left hand and began testing the response in each finger. This was my chance, my only chance. I focused every fiber of my being on that pinky finger, remembering what it had felt like the night before when it had moved. I visualized the nerve pathways, imagined the electrical signals fighting their way through damaged brain tissue. "Move," I commanded it. "Move now. Show her that I'm here." "That's strange," Maria murmured. My heart leaped. Had she seen it? Had she noticed something? "Mrs. Patterson, I'm going to test that reflex again, okay?" She lifted my hand once more, and I concentrated harder than I had ever concentrated on anything in my life. "Move. Please move. Let her see that I'm still here." There it was. The tiniest twitch, barely visible. But Maria was young and observant, and she was looking for it. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. "Did you just—" She tested it again, and again I managed the slight movement. It was exhausting, like trying to lift a car with my bare hands. But I did it. "Mrs. Patterson, can you hear me? If you can hear me, try to move your finger again." I summoned every ounce of strength I had left and moved my pinky finger one more time. Maria dropped my hand and ran from the room. I could hear her calling for the charge nurse, her voice high with excitement. "You need to come see this. Mrs. Patterson in 214. I think she might be conscious." Within minutes, my room was full of people. The charge nurse, Dr. Martinez from the day shift, Linda the social worker. They all gathered around my bed, talking in excited, hushed voices. "Show me exactly what you saw," the charge nurse said. Maria lifted my hand again. "Mrs. Patterson, if you can hear us, please move your little finger." I was so tired now, the effort of those few small movements having drained me completely. But I knew this was the most important moment of the past 3 years. I had to do it. I had to show them I was here. The movement was even smaller this time, barely perceptible, but it was enough. "Dear God," Dr. Martinez breathed. "How long has this been going on?" "I don't know," Maria said. "I just noticed it during routine care. But she's definitely responding to verbal commands. We need to call Dr. Patel immediately, and the family. This changes everything." As they bustled around making phone calls and adjusting monitors, I felt a mixture of relief and terror wash over me. Relief that finally someone knew I was conscious. Terror because I realized that being conscious meant I would have to find a way to communicate what I had overheard, what I had learned about my family's true feelings during my long imprisonment. Dr. Patel arrived within an hour, and the neurological tests began immediately. More extensive than anything I had undergone since the initial stroke, they tested every possible response, every potential sign of consciousness. I could move my left pinky finger consistently now, though it required enormous effort. Sometimes I could also manage a tiny movement with my left ring finger, though this was much more difficult. "This is remarkable," Dr. Patel said, as he documented each small response. "Mrs. Patterson appears to be in a classic locked-in state. She's conscious and aware, but unable to move or speak due to the location of her brain damage. The fact that she's developed this minimal voluntary movement after 3 years suggests some neural recovery, though very limited." Sarah arrived as they were finishing the tests. I could hear her footsteps in the hallway, faster than usual, and when she entered the room, her breathing was quick and shallow, like she had been crying or running. "Is it true?" she asked. "Is she really—" Your mother appears to be conscious and aware, Dr. Patel said gently. She can respond to simple commands by moving her left pinky finger. It's a very limited response, but it's definitive proof of consciousness. Sarah approached my bed slowly, as if she was afraid I might disappear if she moved too quickly. Mom, can you hear me? Dr. Patel instructed her on how to ask yes or no questions, using 1 movement for yes and 2 for no. It was painfully slow, but it was communication. Mom, if you can hear me, move your finger once. I moved my finger once. Sarah gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. Oh God, Mom. You've been conscious this whole time? You could hear everything we said? 1 movement. Yes. The implications of that answer hit her immediately. Her face went white and she sank into the chair beside my bed. The things we talked about, she whispered. The things we said about letting you go. You heard all of that? 1 movement. Yes. Sarah began to cry then, deep sobs that shook her whole body. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. We thought you were gone. We thought we were doing the right thing. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her that I understood, that I didn't blame her. But I was limited to yes and no, trapped in a communication system that couldn't express the complexity of forgiveness and love. Dr. Patel cleared his throat gently. Mrs. Patterson, I'm going to ask you some questions to assess your cognitive function. Do you know what year it is? This was harder. How could I communicate a year with finger movements? Dr. Patel seemed to realize the problem. Let me ask it differently. Has it been more than 2 years since your stroke? 1 movement. Yes. More than 4 years? 2 movements. No. Do you know where you are? 1 movement. Yes. Are you in pain? 2 movements. No. The questions continued for another hour, establishing that I was not only conscious, but cognitively intact. I could think clearly. I could remember events from before my stroke. I understood complex concepts. I was trapped in a paralyzed body, but my mind was completely functional. When Tom arrived, the atmosphere in the room changed. Sarah had told him about my consciousness over the phone, but seeing it for himself was different. He stood at the foot of my bed, his face pale, his hands clenched at his sides. Maggie, he said finally, I don't know what to say. We had no idea. Dr. Patel explained the situation to him, the same way he had explained it to Sarah. Tom listened carefully, asking practical questions about prognosis and treatment options. But I could see the guilt written across his face. So, she heard everything we discussed about comfort care? He asked. If she was conscious during those conversations, then yes, she would have heard them. Tom ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from times when he was stressed about work or money. Mrs. Patterson, he said, addressing me directly for the first time. We were trying to do what we thought was best. We thought you were suffering, that keeping you alive was cruel. I wanted to tell him that I understood, that the decision they had been considering wasn't wrong given what they knew. But how could I explain something so complicated with simple finger movements? Dr. Patel intervened. I think we should focus on the present situation. Mrs. Patterson is conscious and aware, which completely changes her care plan. We need to explore options for improving her quality of life and communication. Over the next few days, specialists came and went. A speech therapist who tried various methods to see if I could produce any sounds. I couldn't. An occupational therapist who tested my ability to operate different communication devices with my limited finger movement. Some showed promise. a neurologist who specialized in locked-in syndrome, and explained to my family what my life might look like going forward. The prognosis varies greatly, she explained to Sarah and Tom during one of their visits. Some patients with locked-in syndrome learn to communicate quite effectively using eye movements or computer interfaces. Others remain very limited in their communication abilities. Your mother's case is complicated by the fact that she doesn't appear to have reliable eye movement, so we'll need to work with the finger movement she's developed. Emma came to visit that weekend, and seeing her reaction to my newfound consciousness was perhaps the most difficult part of the entire experience. She was 16 now, poised on the edge of adulthood, and the knowledge that I had been aware during all those times she had visited and talked to my seemingly unconscious form overwhelmed her. "Grandma, were you listening when I told you about getting into the honor society? One movement? Yes. And when I talked about boys and school and all that stuff? One movement? Yes." She began to cry, and I wished desperately that I could reach out and hold her, could stroke her hair the way I used to when she was little and had nightmares. "I feel so stupid," she said. "All those times I said things like, 'I know you can't hear me,' or 'I wish you could be here for this.' You were here. You were listening the whole time." If I could have spoken, I would have told her that those visits had been the highlight of my existence, that her voice had been a lifeline keeping me connected to the world. But finger movements couldn't convey that depth of emotion. The hardest conversation came a week after my consciousness had been discovered. Sarah came alone one evening, after visiting hours, and sat in the chair beside my bed for a long time, without speaking. Finally, she took my hand. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." I waited. "Do you want to keep living like this? I know it must be terrible, being trapped in your body, not being able to speak or move, or do any of the things that made you who you are. If you want us to still consider comfort care, I'll understand." The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. Did I want to keep living like this? The answer was complex, layered with considerations I had never imagined having to make. Did I want to continue existing in a body that felt like a prison? No. Did I want to miss Emma's graduation, her wedding, the grandchildren I might never meet? No. Did I want to continue being a financial and emotional burden on my family? No. But did I want to die? After fighting so hard to make contact with the world again, after finally proving that I was still here, still aware, still capable of love, even if I couldn't express it properly? "Mom," Sarah prompted gently. I thought about all the things I still wanted to say to her, to Tom, to Emma. I thought about the possibility that medical technology might advance, that new treatments might become available. I thought about the fact that my consciousness had returned after 3 years. Who knew what other improvements might be possible? But mostly, I thought about love, about how much I loved them and how much they loved me, even if that love was complicated by guilt and exhaustion and practical considerations. One movement. Yes, I wanted to keep living. Sarah squeezed my hand and began to cry again. But this time her tears seemed different. Relieved, maybe. Or hopeful. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. We'll figure this out together. I don't know how, but we will." Over the following months, my life changed in ways I could never have imagined. A computer specialist came to the nursing home and set up a communication system that I could operate with my finger movements. It was slow and laborious, but for the first time in over 3 years, I could form words, sentences, complete thoughts. The first message I typed took me 45 minutes. I love you all. I don't blame you. We will get through this together. Sarah read it aloud and cried so hard that Maria had to bring her tissues and a glass of water. My room was rearranged to accommodate the new equipment and to make visits more comfortable for my family. A better chair for Sarah, a small table where Emma could do her homework while keeping me company, a shelf for the books that Tom began reading aloud to me in the evenings. The communication device opened up worlds I had thought were lost forever. I could ask about Sarah's work, about Emma's boyfriends, about Tom's golf game. I could express preferences about my care, about what I wanted to watch on television, about which music I wanted to hear. I could tell jokes, share memories, offer advice. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was a life. And after 3 years of silence, having a voice again, even one that required technological assistance, felt like a miracle. Emma brought her friends to meet me sometimes, and I became the grandmother who communicated through a computer, who could still offer wisdom about teenage problems even if I couldn't bake cookies or drive them to the mall. They were fascinated by my story, by the idea that someone could be conscious but unable to communicate for so long. It's like you were in a coma but awake, one of Emma's friends said during a visit. That's the most terrifying thing I've ever heard. Also the most amazing, Emma corrected her. She never gave up. Even when everyone thought she was gone, she was still fighting to come back to us. The relationship between Sarah and Tom grew stronger through the experience, I think. The guilt they had carried about considering comfort care transformed into a determination to make my remaining time as meaningful as possible. They took turns visiting, sharing the responsibility so that neither of them carried the entire burden. And slowly, very slowly, other improvements came. I developed a tiny bit of movement in my left wrist. My eye movements became slightly more controlled, allowing for a backup communication method when the computer wasn't available. I learned to make a small humming sound. Not quite speech, but close enough that familiar ears could sometimes understand simple words. Dr. Patel called it remarkable neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new connections even after severe damage. He published a paper about my case in a medical journal, changing the names but describing the progression from coma to locked-in syndrome to partial recovery. But the most important change was in how my family looked at me. No longer was I a burden or a source of guilt. I was their wife, mother, and grandmother, who happened to be disabled. I was still the person who had raised Sarah alone, who had taught Emma to braid her hair, who remembered every birthday and anniversary and important moment in their lives. I was still me, just in a different form than they had expected. One evening, almost a year after my consciousness had been discovered, Emma was doing her homework at the table in my room, while Sarah read a magazine in the chair beside my bed. It was a peaceful scene, the kind of ordinary family moment I had thought was lost forever. Emma looked up from her calculus textbook and said, "Grandma, I'm writing my college application essays. One of them asks about a person who has influenced my life. Would it be okay if I wrote about you?" Using my communication device, I typed back, "I would be honored, but write about the grandmother who taught you to be strong, not the one who lies in this bed." "But you're the same person," Emma said firmly. "The stroke didn't change who you are. It just changed how you communicate with us." She was right, of course. I was still the same person, with the same memories, the same love for my family, the same stubborn determination that had carried me through raising a child alone and working 2 jobs and now fighting my way back from the edge of oblivion. The difference was that now my family knew it too. As I write this, or rather, as I slowly type this, using the eye-tracking technology that has replaced my finger-operated device. It has been 5 years since my stroke, and 2 years since my consciousness was discovered. I am still paralyzed, still dependent on others for every aspect of my physical care. But I am not gone. I am not a burden. I am not suffering in the way my family once feared. I am a woman who survived the unthinkable, who found a way back from the darkness, who learned that love can persist even in the most impossible circumstances. My story is not the one I would have chosen, but it is mine, and I am grateful for every difficult, beautiful, heartbreaking day of it. Emma graduated as valedictorian and gave a speech about resilience that made the entire auditorium cry. Sarah got a promotion at work and bought a house closer to the nursing home so she could visit more easily. Tom learned to play guitar and brings it with him sometimes to play the old songs I taught Sarah when she was little. We are still a family, different than we were before, changed by circumstance and time and the terrible fragility of human bodies, but still bound together by love that proves stronger than despair. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between words, I remember that tiny movement in my pinky finger that saved my life. And I am grateful for the miracle of connection, for the power of love to reach across the vast distances that separate us from one another, even when those distances exist within our own bodies. My story could have ended with my family's decision to let me go. Instead, it became a story about coming back, about the incredible resilience of the human spirit, and about the love that refuses to give up even when all hope seems lost.